King of the Forgotten Darkness is an epic tale of a traumatized hero who must journey through darkness and in between worlds to confront what he's fled from. The story is perfect for readers who are looking for a magical quest.
Today, we have a special guest. I'm honored to be speaking with Dr. Erik Goodwyn. He is the author of Kingdom of the Forgotten Darkness. We'll be chatting about all things related about his book. Welcome. Please feel free to share more a little bit about yourself.
Mm. Well, uh, hmm, I've I've been doing I've been writing, creative writing for quite a while. But this is my first published novel. Before that, I was doing a lot of scholarly nonfiction writing, and I still do that. But this is kind of my pet project that I've been doing for years and years. Um, and thank goodness I have a day job because it's really tough to publish out there. But here we are. So I did get King of the Forgotten Darkness published, and I'm working on book two, and I've got a whole series in mind, and some of the books in the series are already written. Actually, that's how long I've been working on this project.
So you mentioned, it took you a while to kind of get this book going and from idea to publication. So I would love to hear like your thought process on that, just if you can share whatever you can.
Yeah, sure. Started. I've been writing, creative writing ever since I was a kid. I would fill up those little black and white composition books full of all kinds of ludicrous stories, and always been interested in fantasy um, and sci-fi, which is fantasy's little brother, in my opinion. Um, but I didn't really start getting to serious work on the novel until the '90s. And then, of course, it's quite a bit after the '90s now. And so what I've been doing since then is, working on my career and all that, and just tinkering with the novel and writing it, rewriting it, getting feedback and so forth. And finally, about, I would say 5 or 6 years ago is when I really started hitting it again, really seriously, working on improving my craft and just doing a deep dive into the art of novel writing. Um, and here we are. This is the end result.
You mentioned a little bit about some challenges that you face like in the publishing world. Is there anything you can share about some challenges, whether maybe you having writer's block or just the publication itself?
Well, a writer's block. I've never struggled with writer's block, but no, there have been times when I've had to push through, just not wanting to sit down and write. I don't know if that's the same thing as writer's block, because I've always got ideas. It's just the getting them on paper when I've got a bunch of other things going on. So I think one of the big challenges, um, is that the industry right now is super competitive. Lots of people want to write novels, which is great. I love the outpouring of creative energy, but um, only so many places publish. So, as you know, self-publishing has become huge now, and that's its own. It got its own set of unique challenges. I didn't go down that road, but I applaud anyone who does, because it's a massive undertaking. And a lot of what the self-publishers are doing now, we in traditional publishing circles, we have to do now as well anyway. So like we have to do a lot of our own marketing, because the publishing houses just don't have the energy or the resources or whatever it is to do what they used to do. There's just so much competition. Um, so that's a challenge. Another big challenge, especially for a fantasy writer, is length. Everybody who's a fantasy fan loves those great big Brandon Sanderson 1,300-page chonkers, and a debut author can just not write that. And I think one of the frustrating things for me has been readers who expect that, and then they're like, well, it was too short, it was all that. And it's just like, dude, if you're trying to be a debut author, you're not going to be able to write something like that. They're not going to be interested. If you've established a name for yourself and all that, that's great. But so that's plus minus though for me. I think it is because of that, for whatever reason, fantasy fans love those humongous tomes. I think sometimes fantasy authors, they lean on that and they make the story less streamlined than it really could be. And so this has forced me to be really, really streamlined. And I like a faster pace anyway, so it kind of suits me anyway. So that's been a big challenge, is trying to get the word count right. And when you have humongous ideas that span, centuries and all this kind of stuff, you've got to zero in on it, and you can't just write your book about everything under the sun and throw it in there in the kitchen sink too.
I'm with you right there with just less is more, and it doesn't have to be a huge many pages, right? It could just
Yeah,
be nice and short and you get the point across, which I love that your book does.
yeah,
I praised it in my review. So, um, with, yeah, because the challenges with fantasy or sci-fi fiction, some authors feel like they have to write a lot and you don't need all that fluff. So I'm definitely in the same world as you.
yeah. Now you do have to write longer because you are establishing a whole new world, and a lot of fantasy authors, I think, that I've helped, like with beta reading and whatnot, they run into this thing I call the fantasy world problem, which is if I'm a brand new person to this world you've created, I don't know what the rules are, and you just have stuff happening. I don't know what I'm supposed to be surprised by if you don't establish the rules, right? So that's the fantasy world problem. And so you do have to spend some time establishing, like, what is expected in a world where anything can happen because you've got magic and monsters thrown in there. So you have to establish that, and then once you do that, you can have something happen that's unexpected. But if you don't do all that setup, so that's why one of the reasons why it gets longer. But I don't really think it needs to be 1,300 pages. But that's just me. Some people love that.
Agreed, agreed. Do
Mhm.
you think, I mean, we're kind of getting to, you mentioned it earlier, you're working on book two. Will it be the same length, a little bit longer? Are you able to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I can talk some about it. I do believe it will be longer because even though I've gotten lots of great positive feedback on it, even the people that loved it said, "I wish it would have been a little bit longer." And I think I remember in your review too, you had mentioned there were some times when you felt like the pace was like just bam, 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 bam,
Yes, yes.
and a little bit slow down. So yeah, I will, but I'm not going to go full Sando on anybody. Or Steven Erickson, he's another one that writes massive, massive books. So probably a little bit longer.
Right. What was your inspiration for creating the two worlds, Midworld and a renter?
Yeah, so Midworld and Errantier are both okay. So in fantasy, especially with the way I look at fantasy as a reflection of who we are inside. So it's very much like dreams. When I work with folks with dreams, I've done a lot of scholarly writing on it. And the thing that emerges over and over again is that what the brain is doing when it creates a dream is trying to tell a story of you and what your life is like right now. And it uses metaphors to do it. Well, if I'm going to use metaphors, then the best possibility is for me to not be constrained in what kind of metaphor I can use, which means if I can bend the rules of physics a little bit to get my point across, I will. And that's why dreams present sometimes as seemingly bizarre and completely unrealistic, because it's not worried about realism, it's worried about symbolism. It's trying to say, my life is progressing as if I'm flying away from my problems, in which case I might dream about literally flying away from a problem, And so I can look at that and go, so it seems like you're kind of flying. It seems like you feel like you're flying away from the problems or maybe avoiding them somehow. So I do that same thing when I approach fantasy. And you can look at King of the Forgotten Darkness a lot of different ways. You can take it as just kind of a straightforward adventure, or you can look at it as on a kind of more emotional, metaphorical level and say, not only is this kind of a representation of what I feel like modern society has done in moving away from the imaginative and the fantastical and continually striving for more and more and more control over suffering and, you know, chaos and all that. And that's good, but is it possible to get too good at that? And so that's kind of what Midworld represents, that mentality. Whether you look at it as a social or more of an internal, you can look at it either way. And then Errantier, of course, represents kind of the dark side, the chaos, the place where anything can happen. But of course, there's also beauty there too that you didn't expect. And so that's a lot of what I put into this. It's not a one for one. You know, it's not an allegory per se. It's more like an extended dream. And the idea of someone like Liam who has had all kinds of trauma, his journey to recover from that trauma involves going into the place that he doesn't want to go. And that's something I see in therapy all the time. One of the hallmarks of people with PTSD, for example, is avoidance. And it's very understandable why they would avoid it because it's scary. But you can only do that for so long, which is why the tagline for the book is hiding from your demons only makes them stronger, because eventually they come and find you.
course.
Yeah. So but of course, being that I'm a psychiatrist, I didn't want to present that as a simple process. You know, like sometimes in movies, it's just like, all I needed was a hug and poof, everything's better. It's like, I wish it was that easy. I really do. But it is just not.
Right.
You know, instead it involves this scary process of going into, you know, metaphorically a place where you find to be quite scary. And then the other side of that is Mia's journey is similar in the sense not that she was traumatized so much as neglected, and she has to find, and what neglect is a very insidious kind of trauma, in which you feel as though you're meaningless, you don't matter to anybody, and that's what she struggles with. And her journey on going into Errantier is ultimately rectifying as well, helps her to see that she does matter. She, in fact, has much more power than she ever thought she could have imagined. And it's tied to her artistic talent and her artistic drive, more so than talent, even. Just the fact that she is such has such devotion to that. I had one person I think that didn't quite understand that because it felt to them that the only reason that she was able to learn magic so quickly was that it felt right, but they weren't paying attention because she had been working on her art ever since she was a kid, even with people telling her to knock it off and quit wasting her time. That was nurturing the magical power that doesn't manifest until you go into the magical world. And then all of a sudden it hit her like a ton of bricks.
I feel
And
like,
so that's kind of how it works.
yeah, I feel like that's also like the situation, like right place, right time too.
Mm.
And I mean, I don't want to spoil it. I also like that she's able to kind of like speak to animals. That was like a really nice thing.
Mm.
One of my other favorite quotes that you put in the book is "Don't let fear take your heart." So I feel like that kind of encompasses what you just summarized, when a little bit of summarize between those two characters.
Yes, that quote is actually from a dream that I had. That my mother was telling me that as I was struggling, and I wanted to include that as a little bit of a personal piece of my own journey to make it feel more, give it more punch, you know, because his mission is to try to rescue her, to rescue his mother, and through her magic power, he kind of inherits that legacy from her. But then he really needs her help because he's facing an insurmountable, you know, seemingly impossible odds. And that meant a lot to me when I woke up and I realized, hey, that, you know, that really helps. That helps encapsulate it. Now, maybe she was coming to me from beyond the grave because she died when I was about 22, or you know, maybe it's just my imagination cooking up things. I don't care because it was inspiring.
Definitely. It was definitely a touching piece, and I definitely felt that when I read it. So,
You're the
um,
first person, and I think so far the only one who's reviewed it that picked that up, that
woo!
quote. Yeah, and so it must have, resonated with you, which is great. I love that. I
Definitely.
was just recently this past weekend at Billings Fun Con, which is kind of like a Comic Con, but it was board games and anime and toys and books. There was several authors there, including my, not just me, but a lot, and I had a lot of fun. And I sold out of the books I had, so that was a success. A success. But it was great. You get to talk to people. I ran into a couple of people that had already read it, so that was kind of cool.
Yes. Connecting
Yeah.
with fans is also an important relationship building when building a fan base as well. Is there more events that you're going to, so that people can buy your books and things like that?
Oh yeah, yeah. I have several. I've been to two book signings. One was in Billings, where I live, and then there was another one in Louisville, where I used to live. And I'll be going back. I'm going to Cheyenne, Wyoming, and then I'm going back to Louisville, and then um, I'm doing one more, and I don't even remember where I'm going next. Oh, Elizabethtown.
Are we going to go to
Also,
the coastal cities here, like Washington, Oregon, California, anytime soon?
not as of yet, but who knows?
Excited, excited.
Yeah, right. That's a good place to go. I mean, there's big cities there.
Yes, yes, lots of nice little like small bookstores or big bookstores too.
So I've been to Barnes and Nobles mostly because they've been pretty, accessible, and they'll work with me on that. So that's a lot of fun.
Um, you have a lot on your plate. Your career,
Mhm.
writing, you got to balance family and work as well. So, what is your tips, tricks on how to balance everything? Because I also like tie this to the quote again, don't let your fears take your heart, because it's like you have all these things going, right? And so then you start getting in your head, and then you bring yourself down. And so for you, you have a lot going on, you're doing everything.
Yeah, great question. That 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 question and the other one that I get all the time is, where do you find time to do all of the stuff that you do? Honestly, my off the cuff answer to that question is I have no idea, but actually I do, and it's I decided early on if I was ever really going to take this seriously, this idea that I was going to write a novel, that I had to take it seriously, just like and put the same kind of discipline into it that I put into going to medical school and all of that. And I actually wrote one of the books in the Raven's Tale series while I was in medical school. But it was, for me, it was kind of a way to unwind. It was very different from when I was studying neuroscience and biology and anatomy and all this kind of stuff. And so it was kind of a way for me to retreat from all that hard science into the imaginary and into the story. So I had to look at it that way rather than as another chore to do. If you do it that way, you're never going to get there. And even still, there have been many times when I would sit down and I'd look at the screen. I'd be like, man, I don't want to do this right now. But I have several tricks. Any budding authors out there that I've used, maybe they'll work for you, to try to prime the pump, as I put it. One is if I'm really just not interested in writing, but of course I've got that other voice in my head that says, yeah, but you need to if you're going to make this, if you're going to get any progress. So I'll say, okay, I'll make a deal with myself. I'll sit down, I'll write one sentence, and then I can be done for the day and I won't fuss at myself. But then after I write that one sentence, and I already know that this is the trick, but it works, it seems to work anyway. I'll write one sentence. I'm like, okay, how do I feel now? Maybe I got one more in me. Okay, I'll try that. Do, do, do. And then before long, I've got two or three sentences and I'm on a roll at that point. I'm like, well, okay, let's just finish this scene. That works sometimes, usually, if I'm really feeling the wall. Another trick I'll do is I'll go back one scene or one chapter, if they're short chapters like my books tend to be, and I'll read it to get momentum. I'll be like, where was I here? Okay, what was going on? Oh yeah, all right, now this is where we're going now. And then I can kind of dive in and keep going and kind of it's kind of like a running start, you know. So that's one way to do it. Um, but sometimes I just have to say, I've got to take the day off. I'm not going to fool with it. But then the next day comes that voice that says, okay, you gave yourself a day off and there's no slacking today, dude. And setting aside a specific time for it too helps. When I was really super busy, I would wall off 1 hour of my day and say, okay, this is the time I've dedicated to writing. I'm not going to be scrolling on my phone or none of that crap. Or, even if I'm just sitting there staring out the window, pondering the universe, that's what I'm doing. And a lot of times that helps too. I think sometimes people will get into their head that, if I sit down, I'm going to have to write a huge amount, um, in which case they don't write any because it's just overwhelming. So the 1 hour thing helps that. No, I'm only going to write for 1 hour and then I'll be done. And then I can go do all this other stuff I need to do. Those are some tricks that I've used.
Yeah, I
And
think
that
that
works for the scholarly writing as well.
yeah, no, I think that's it sounds very practical, very realistic, like one sentence, not that bad. And then
Yeah.
yeah, like you said, once you build that momentum or it just becomes habit, then it doesn't feel like one sentence. You could go on and write more. So very practical.
Yeah. But there's usually two voices in a writer who's sitting there. One is I really want to write this, and another one that says I really would rather do anything else. So
Yeah.
how you let those two converse and negotiate is how you get the stuff done.
Yes. So with your process or, what you've done so far, working with publishers or, is there anything you feel like you could have done differently?
Oh. I think I would have focused more attention on the art and the craft of writing first. Because like a lot of writers who get real excited about the idea, they just sort of dive in. And I've learned over the years now that that's a common mistake. And it's really kind of strange too. Like, does anybody ever go in thinking they're just going to write a symphony without studying music? No, of course not. Well, why is it that writers do that? Oh, maybe it's just because we all know how to write and we all know how to read. And we all, especially if you're interested in writing a novel, you've probably read quite a few. And so maybe you think, well, this doesn't seem so hard. All I have to do is sit down and write stuff. And you don't see all the work that goes on behind the scenes, which is by design. A really good writer will keep that stuff because it takes away from the immersion, right? So if I'd had it to do it over again, once I sat down and said, I really want to write a fantasy novel, I would have said, but first, I'm going to take some classes on creative writing. I'm going to read, 12 books, like I have now, take, courses and audio classes and everything else. And then I would have, I think, been able to have gotten a lot further along than I am now. But here we are. It's part of the process.
Would you like to stay in the fantasy realm or kind of venture out into maybe like with your background and medical and psychiatry, would you do like a psychological thriller, murder, something like that? Or
No, I'm pretty much a diehard fantasy guy. And I'll be happy if I can finish the series that I'm working on, which is 9 books. Again, they're not going to be massive tomes or anything, but I've got that one, I've got it all sorted out and worked out. And like I said, a couple of books are already written, so I can finish that. Who knows, maybe. But for now, I'm focusing on that. But I have kind of hedged my bets a little bit because with Midworld, you've got a little bit of a futuristic setting there. So I can at least meander into some sci-fi territory and dabble in it. Although the Midworld is really there as more of a framing kind of reference point, kind of like in Harry Potter, where you don't spend a whole lot of times with the Dursleys. It's mostly about Hogwarts and the magical world.
right.
That's kind of the ratio that I have at work too. Although things are going to get a little wild near the end. I'll just leave it at
Ooh, exciting.
that.
I do have a couple of favorite characters. I like Maple.
She's very
Liam,
popular.
he's a good growing on me. Mia, I did have some issues with her in the beginning, I think because she was kind of just figuring herself out, but then like towards the end, like I said, she's a very in my review, she's a very
Mhm.
strong character, and I think people can like look up to her and things like that. And she really, after she like grows into herself, she really embraces like who she is fully. So
Yeah.
dragons, I'm all about dragons as well, and you have that. So it's just like all of these like good check marks.
The Aaron tier has 20 different kinds of dragons in it. And you run into one in this
Yes,
book, but there's
yes.
many more where that came from. So if anybody who loves dragons, there's more where that came from.
Okay, I felt like the one dragon in there um I felt like he was like a big kahuna. Is there a bigger kahuna than him?
Oh, I can't reveal that.
Okay, okay.
But yeah,
So
he's a big kahuna, all right.
I thought he was. Okay, okay. Let's see. If you could, I mean, I already know what world you're gonna choose, but for those that are, watching, listening, what world would you live in?
Oh, Aaron tier, of course. And that's kind of the curious thing about it is that what I want people to do is think about that. Most people will say that. They'll say, "Yeah, I'd rather live there." Well, why? Well, because midworld's kind of boring. But then I deliberately made midworld to be essentially, what if we succeeded in all the things we're trying to do? We're trying to eliminate war and crime and want and suffering. And it's kind of hard to argue with that, right? I do too. I don't want those things either. But let's just think a bit about, well, what if we succeed? Then what happens? And now part of the challenge, of course, is that in midworld, the suffering is alleviated because everyone can just take this drug anytime they're upset. And there's an early part in the book where Liam is standing there looking at one of these dispensers of Oronol. That's the drug you can take if you're feeling bad. You just take this and you're not feeling bad anymore. Yay! And he refuses to take it. And that is that scene is based on a thought experiment that I talk about in some of my scholarly papers and that some of my lectures. And I ask people, if you imagine the worst loss that you've suffered that you can remember, okay, so do that and then do that, and I'll say, okay, now imagine that psychiatry is advanced to the point where if you could take a pill, you would no longer feel the pain of that loss anymore. Would you take it? And all the times I've asked this at different lectures, across the years, I've only had one person say they would. Everyone else says no, they would not take it. Well, isn't that interesting?
Very interesting.
Right? So that just that very that impulse to say, well, wait a minute, no, I don't want to take it. And now, of course, I feel the same way. Well, why is that? And I think it's because in psychiatry, psychology, we've been focused so much on eliminating pain and suffering. We, I think, sometimes lose track of what is the point of pain and suffering. It's not just there to make our lives miserable. We feel it for some kind of a reason. And should our goal be to just eliminate it all and just be completely in la la land all the time? I don't know that that's going to help us. Rather, what I've found, at least in my practice, is that people aren't really, they do want to feel less suffering if they are suffering, which is completely, I understand that. And I work very hard at helping that. But what they really want is meaning. That's what they really want. So that's where I think that thought experiment is so telling, is because if you think about that loss, well, I earned that pain. That has meaning for me. That person meant a lot to me, so it's supposed to hurt that they're gone. And if you were to remove that, what would that do? Right? Would it mean that they didn't matter anymore? Like there's a lot of that goes on, I think, maybe in the background, which is behind that decision to say, "No, wait a minute, I'm not going to take that." So I wanted I wanted Liam to kind of embody that decision. not only that, but also to show that he's kind of a hard head, and he feels like he's deals with problems by slamming into them, with his full speed ahead. Uh, so
I like that he chose not to, drink that because I feel like also, yeah, you can numb away the pain, but then I feel like it will just somehow creep back, whether you're like in your dreams, right? Maybe your pain will come through your dreams. So you're not really fully, you're kind of just putting a band-aid on it versus like really
yeah,
getting to the root cause. So it's definitely hard, right? Definitely hard. So
sure.
no, I guess I wouldn't say right way, but like people deal with it in their own way, and hopefully it's
Yeah, in my business, what we do is we try to get people to a place of what we call integrated trauma or integrated grief, where it has become a part of your story, but it's not the only thing that matters anymore. And that's the big problem with trauma, is that you feel like it's still happening right now, over and over and over again. You're like you're reliving it over and over again. You're stuck in that moment in your life. When you get better, and people do get better, they are able to look at it as a challenging part of their life, but only one piece of a larger tapestry. Now, the journey to get to that point is sometimes difficult, sure, but that's the only way you can really fix it. That's the only way you can really get to where you're not in total misery 24 hours a day. And just taking a pill that makes it automatically go away. We might be able to do that someday, and that's kind of the question I'm posing with this first book. I get into a whole lot of other questions like this in the rest of the series, which is, what does it mean for us to what is really the question of suffering all about, and how do we handle it? Now, if I could just give you the total answer to this question, I wouldn't have to write stories about it, right? So the stories give you the richness of my answer.
perfect.
Hmm.
Well, I'm gonna wrap it up here. Thank you, Dr. Goodwin. This has been a delightful talk. Before we sign off, where can the viewers find you, your IG, where can they also get your books?
Yeah, yeah. So my book's available on Amazon. You can get Kindle versions, or paperback. You can go to my website, ericgoodwyn.com, and you can learn all about all the stuff, including the novel, but the other things I'm doing, like speaking engagements and what have you, and scholarly papers, all that the really hardcore egghead stuff. You can get into that if you want. I can send a link to as well to the book that has all the reviews and things too.
Yes, yes. And then do you have like a social handle, some of the viewers can follow you too?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram as the Imaginarium, and that's my YouTube channel, also the Imaginarium. I'm on TikTok, also Imaginarium, and what else? Facebook. I'm on there. That's Erik Goodwyn, author. So that's where you can find me. Uh, oh, I guess just if if you read the book and you like it, don't forget to review me on Goodreads and Amazon.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Mhm. Thanks for having me.
Yes.